Bonjour, welcome. Good to see y'all. Thanks for coming out. I'm Kyle Wright. I'm a professor of environmental justice here at Michigan, and I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and we are a Anishinaabe people. Welcome y'all to Anishinaabe territory. Good to have y'all. We've been waiting for generations. I'm really thrilled, and I thank you all for coming, but I'm just so excited that many of you have the same values that I have and want to have the same conversation that I want to have too. And wow, right now, the knowledge and experience of Naira Sharif, Maria Lopez Nunez, Anthony Rogers Wright, and Isaac Severe, that's what we need right now. We need to synergize with what they came here to share. And this is just an awesome opportunity. And I want to thank the conveners, because I wish, I could take credit for the convening. First of all, thank you, Michelle Martinez, our inaugural director of the Tishman Center for Social Justice and the Environment. Michelle is a force for good, a convener, a true emphasizer of kinship and connections, and I'm just grateful for Michelle's hard work, mentorship, and all the amazing, amazing aspirations that Michelle has for the center. I also want to thank Amy Novak from our comms team at SEAS, and the entire comms team, because they all do amazing work. They bring great expertise and professionalism, and they make these events exactly the events that they need to be. Now, I have a great honor to introduce our moderator, Naira Sharif. And Naira is somebody that I have for over a decade had eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony of their works, their transformative actions, and the way that they've touched many people in Michigan, but also in the world. Naira Sharif is a grassroots organizer based in Flint, Michigan. Naira was one of the co-founders of the Flint Democracy Defense League, a grassroots group formed to confront Flint's emergency manager in 2011. They have over 10 years' experience organizing local, state, and national electoral issues and campaigns. Remember, I said I was an eyewitness, and the work that Naira does is 360. It's everything. Naira, on the one hand, is right there with their community, doing the needed community-based service and aid, but also, I don't know anybody that knows more about Michigan policy and national environmental policy than Naira. That's why I said 360. And just because you haven't had the privilege I have to be an eyewitness, they have been featured on multiple shows, podcasts, and documentaries, including Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. They are founding director of Flint Rising, a coalition of Flint residents and community groups, labor, and progressive allies that formed in the aftermath of Flint's emergency declaration to the water disaster. Welcome, Naira. Thanks for moderating.
This mic isn't on. Can y'all hear me? Now is it? Okay, great. I thought I was gonna have to stand up. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to moderate this panel. And thank you, Dr. White. And I'm just gonna give a shout out from what I can see in the audience, Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. Like, I see y'all in the house. You always have to have comrades like in a fight, and Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition is that comrade, on the fight for environmental justice within the state of Michigan. And before I move on with, I would say, grounding this, I would like to take a point of privilege. I am from Flint, Michigan. And Flint, Michigan was the birthplace of the United Auto Workers. In 1937, 1938, there was the Flint sit-down strike, which at the end of that strike, which was 111 days, like ratified the UAW. And I grew up in a strong union household. My father was a UAW member, my mom was a Teamster, and currently my brother and sister are both union members, dues-paying union members for ASME and National Nurses United. And one of the things that I learned from growing up in a union household and studying unionism through multiple different things is growing up as a child of the union movement, there was this idea of like everybody in, nobody out. Mm-hmm. Like we do not sacrifice or leave no one behind. Mm-hmm. We're all going to win, and we're all going to fight until we win collectively. And I want to stand in solidarity with the GEO strike that's happening right now on this campus. Because we have no other choice. Unions are, I would say, like a formalized version of collective struggle and protection. And historically, unions have been at the forefront of many different social justice movements. Mm-hmm. Unions have been at the forefront of environmental justice, just thinking about like the 1968 sanitation workers strike when Dr. Martin Luther King, went in support of that strike, when you have those pictures of Black people saying, I am a man. Like I deserve the same economic wages as other folks who don't look like me. Unionism has also been at the forefront of multiple like environmental justice things like OSHA, because, or in my own history, like my dad, when he first started working for General Motors, he worked in the foundry, and only Black people and people of color worked in the foundry. So they were in the dirtiest like conditions. And so like there has been this linkage of like economic justice, environmental justice, reproductive justice. And I know that we talk about intersectionality in the terms of like race and citizenship and stuff, but our movements are also intersectional, because the same person who lives next to a refinery is also on public assistance, is also, like working like minimum wage. And so we have to look at it like from everything. Like we have to like ensure that we don't become, because of the philanthropic complex and government, like intentionally silos our movements. And we have to like work collectively to deconstruct those silos, because we can't just fight for environmental justice and like no one has health care. Like we have to fight for it all, because everybody in, nobody out. And we're just gonna move on now. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. I'm so excited to moderate this panel, Justice in Focus, because I think that these are, who's sharing the stage with me, are one of the most brilliant, like radical minds that I've had, like, I would say now almost 24 hours of being with and bonding and collectively talking. And this is also part of the movement building, is like being in space and fellowship with each other. Yeah. And I'm so excited to get into this conversation. And I know like between me and the conversation are these introductions, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So first, directly to my immediate like left is Maria. I know it's a left, and then it's kind of like another left, and then it's the far left. The medium left and the far left. So immediate left, center left, oh yes. Maria Lopez, I like to joke, okay. Maria Lopez Nunez is the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Organizing for Ironbound Community Corporation. Maria Lopez Nunez, she, her, grew up in Bushwick and remembers being displaced multiple times by racism and violence, which sparked her commitment to fight extractive industries and end sacrifice zones once and for all. The Ironbound District of New York, New Jersey, where she resides, is predominantly Black and Latinx and is one of the most toxic neighborhoods in the country. In her role as Deputy Director of Advocacy and Organizing of Ironbound Community Corporation, she challenges the current political system and holds power brokers and polluters accountable while fighting for environmental, housing, immigrant, and racial justice. She has organized and helped the passage of historic and landmark city and state legislation, such as the Right to Counsel, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and the Environmental Justice Cumulative Impacts Bill, all of which will significantly increase the quality of life of those that are often deemed disposable. She currently serves on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or the WEJAC, on the board of the Climate Justice Alliance. Yeah, shout out to Climate Justice Alliance, or CJA, and is the co-chair of the Grassroots Caucus for Building Equity and Alignment for Environmental Justice. Let's give a round of applause for Maria. The center left, the dapper person in the center, is Anthony Rogers Wright, who is the Director of Environmental Justice for the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. Sorry, drop the. Anthony Carfia Rogers Wright serves as the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest Director of Environmental Justice. In this capacity, he guides and coordinates the organization's EJ strategy, litigation, organizing, and advocacy initiatives. Prior to joining the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, Anthony was the policy coordinator and Green New Deal policy lead with the Climate Justice Alliance, where he assisted with developing and promulgating local, state, and federal organizing and policy strategy for the alliances, then 74 grassroots front-led organizations across the country. A veteran of social justice campaigns, Anthony helped lead the effort to make the former Colorado Health Insurance Cooperative the first health insurance provider in the state's history to remove transgender exclusions from all of their policies in 2012. Yes. He has acted as a policy advisor for numerous candidates for the elected office, including Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign in 2020 and Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns in 2020 and 2016, when he represented the campaign during the testimony to the DNC, or Democratic National Committee, Platform Committee. Anthony was selected as one of GRIS.org's 50 environmentalists you will be talking about in 2016 and recognized as one of the New York City's 100 most influential environmental leaders in 2022 by City and State magazine. Congratulations, Anthony. He has written numerous articles discussing the axiomatic nexus of the climate crisis and racial injustice, and has spoken on the subject at universities throughout the US and in Europe. Anthony serves on the board of directors of Friends of the Earth, Backbone Campaign, and Climate Critical Earth, and Center for Sustainable Economy. He is a proud participating member of the Black Alliance for Peace and the Movement for Black Lives, Black Hive, and is blessed to be a father of his energetic and very loquacious 7-year-old son, Zahir Cielo, AKA Bean. We gotta get Bean. Shout out to Bean. He received his BA in Environmental Science and Policy and his master's degree in Community Development, Environmental Science, and Public Policy from Clark University in Worcester. Sorry everybody from Boston, Massachusetts. Let's give a round of applause for Anthony. And to the far left, my far left, is Isaac Severe, who is the founder and co-director of People's Utility Commons. Isaac Severe is an energy engineer and policy advocate with extensive experience with policy and investment that addresses interlocking issues of race, climate, and vulnerability in California, nationwide, and at the federal level. They are a founding co-director of the People's Utilities Commons, an organization creating tools and analysis with frontline communities to end utility shutoffs permanently and build new utility governance as a key intervention for climate justice. To support movement infrastructure that changes policies and politics, Isaac has joined collective efforts to match and launch the Equitable Building Electrification Fund, the California Green New Deal Coalition, and the Red, Black, and Green New Deal Initiative. They live on unceded Ramatish, Ramatish Ohlone land in San Francisco. Let's give a round of applause to Isaac.
Can we quickly give some love to the ASL interpreter?
Yes, and thank you, ASL interpreter, because accessibility is everything. Okay. So we are more than like 3 years out from the onset of the pandemic, and we had like the 2020 George Floyd uprising, which, you know, like in my own history is like one of the largest kind of civil rights like uprising in my lifetime. And there have been like many lessons that we learned like through that that are becoming more clear about like how our skills and like resources and our social networks are critical. Is there something you learned through this time, or is there something that like may have really crystallized about like our interpersonal relationships and collective power? And I'm gonna start with you, Maria.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about it. First off, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. You know, it's so cool to be able to work with your colleagues and then come see their work. And, you know, I'm really grateful to be able to see Michelle and Dr. Kyle, Dr. Kyle's work here and what you're doing with the students. But for us, we're going to talk about it later, but the EJ bill really couldn't have happened without the uprisings, you know? And so what crystallized, I think, for me is how the EJ bill took, for those of you that don't know, it's the environmental justice law in New Jersey, and it was the strongest environmental justice law when it passed. And that's because it like mandates denials for facilities that are in EJ communities if they're gonna add to the burden of pollution, which I think people assume because a 4-year-old can tell you, you know, don't put another smokestack where there's already a lot of smokestacks. But the law couldn't see that, right? That law took 12 years before, you know, it had been in progress. During that moment of uprising, it was like so much policy moved, right? Like that the people on the ground actually made the rules change. But you have to be ready. You know, it's like we have to be, all this work matters because we don't know when history is gonna find us. And when it finds us, we better be prepared, right? We have to be prepared to move the agenda that protects Black and brown indigenous people in this country, and we have to like move it forward.
I mean, one thing that definitely crystallized for me is this idea of how important translocal organizing is. It took Jersey 12 years, and then across the river, the Hudson River in New York, we were like, whoa. I mean, you know, we have healthy competition with Jersey. We're like, we're not gonna get one up by Jersey. So 2 years after Jersey passed their cumulative impacts bill, we did the same thing in New York. And what we saw in the summer of 2020 was a lot of skill sharing, movement sharing, right? Things that we picked up even from our siblings as far away as Hong Kong, right? Like you didn't see people with leaf blowers blowing back the tear gas. We learned that from our family in Hong Kong, just like, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement went to Palestine to learn about how to deal with you know, stormtroopers of death, otherwise known as the IDF. I would say also what we learned though is that COVID was a great elucidator, right? It at once showed us all the systems that were not working contemporaneously. Healthcare systems not working, water systems not working. Y'all got your water shut off in Detroit and Flint during the COVID pandemic. So all of these systems were right in front of us. But the last thing that I would say, yes, absolutely, Maria is absolutely right. So much policy got passed, so many policy prescriptions. But what we also learned is that, movements cannot be ephemeral, right? Unfortunately, we have seen support for Black Lives Matter plummet to levels that were lower than before George Floyd's assassination. So what it means is that we have to lift up, I call her Sister Warrior number 2. Sister Warrior number 1, if you were wondering, is Assata Shakur. But Sister Warrior number 2 is Angela Davis, who said freedom is a constant struggle. And so we know that we have to continue. The fact that we are still talking about your city's water problems is proof of that. So, but absolutely, and I will just say that the New York Cumulative Impacts Bill is a little bit stronger than Jersey's.
That's what we would hope, right? Don't walk us back, walk us forward.
Got some beef on the stage.
Oh, there's beef on the
Okay. I don't know if you're gonna add to the beef, Isaac, but.
You better add to the beef, Isaac.
I'm going to stay out of the beef and say, I want to point out too, like this was such a time of contradictions, right? That we could both see how so many systems weren't working for us, and yet COVID saw us send out so much cash assistance that all the data has shown dramatically lifted the poverty level in this country for one of the first times in decades, right? We saw that we can stop evictions, we can stop utility disconnections, we can do all these things that demonstrate how much we really can care for one another in this country. That was really inspirational and short-lived, right? And it's been interesting to spend time with students today, to spend so much time with all of you, and we've been talking about concepts like loneliness and the reality of COVID driving us apart. And I've been, to kind of like tell a short personal story, like I've just been involved in a lot more care work in my community with my friends than ever before. And there has been such a shift among those of us who are paying attention to how our kind of like self-work, like the work that we need to do in terms of drawing our own boundaries, saying what we can and can't step up to do, but also stepping in when we know that others can't. We hear a lot of questions now about burnout. How do you guys make it? How do you guys stay in the struggle, right? As a queer person, as a person of color, as someone working on climate, right? Every day, there's some kind of headline that tells me why I should give up. But being able to count on those friends who are holding me and holding me accountable, and also saying it's okay for you to step back because you know what, we've got you, has been such an interesting experience to just learn from every day, and that I'm very gratified that this trip has also been another one of those experiences. So I just wanted to come back and touch on that interpersonal piece, right? Is that it really is important now, I think, for all of us in movement work who are committed to liberatory struggle to know ourselves, to know what those boundaries are that we have, to know what your boundaries are, when you can step in, and the tools that you can offer, right? Knowing that not every fight is your fight because you don't have that skill set, and respecting the kind of like wisdom and contributions of everyone else, right? And for me anyway, it's been this very intense journey of thinking about both self and individual and then that collective in real time and seeing it come up in how we kind of care for one another and, I mean, save each other's lives, hopefully.
Yeah, I wanted to, I would say, like, dig in a little bit deeper. And I know that you guys have not had this question, but like, you know, like you have like these moments where it's like, you know, I think like Ella Baker referred to as spade work of like, what, like when you see like the organizing that you all have collectively done to meet the moment, how do you know the moment is here?
Put my finger on
Because I'm just gonna give like a quick. I'm just gonna give like a quick thing, kind of going back to like the Flint thing, and you know, like we've been marching and all of this stuff for years in Michigan around banning water shutoffs. And then when COVID hit, we're like, why are you shutting off people? If the CDC is recommending for people to wash their hands to stop COVID, what happens if people don't have running water? Like, how are we gonna prevent like this global health crisis? And in Michigan, through organizing of people, of collective folks, and a combination of like people who work in public health alongside with the water justice, alongside with like the W2F of like why are we doing this in this moment where we have like our communities dying? We were successful, and like Michigan, the state of Michigan, convincing the governor to put a moratorium on water shutoffs and then mandating restorations for people who already had their water shut off. And I just wanted to like ask you guys once again, like, how are you meeting the moment? Like, when do you know the moment is here?
I mean, for me, a lot of it is creating the moment, right?
Yes.
And, you know, not to misspeak here, but George Floyd's murder created a moment, but a lot of other people have also been killed and nothing has happened, right? Like, it does take that collectivity, like that collective reaction to, rise to the occasion and make sure that we aren't being killed silently. Because, you know, when we're being killed silently, then they're gonna say we enjoyed our deaths. And I think that too often we're letting organizing opportunities pass us by. We're just too busy to go actually do something about this, or we don't know what to do about it. You know, I'm just a strong believer of like, every crisis is an opportunity. The world is burning down, let's burn it down the systems, right? So that we can create the world that we want. That's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to turn everything on its head and to use the urgency of that to push forward our agenda. If we really believe in democracy, democracy is about participation, like intense participation. It's not like, okay, I voted, okay, great. Like that's step one. I never discourage people from voting, but like, are you attending city council meeting? Or you hire people, do you watch them? Do you watch what they do, or you just send them off and then get upset when they didn't do their job? No, be good supervisors, you know, like a good public is supposed to watch its elected officials. And if you're not watching, then you're kind of, you know, you're an absent teacher, you're an absent parent, and we would never do that. We just send people off to school and not give them a professor, right? Like, so all of that to say is we have to create those moments, and we should not feel helpless, right? Like, we do have agency. And, you know, like when we stand up, people get scared. People in power get scared because they count on our apathy and our disengagement. So I think that that's something we really have to break, that then creates a moment that helps create a new future.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add is that absolutely, the moment, you know, is here every time we get a new IPCC report that is more dire than the previous report, that is more dire than the previous report, right? And so we do have to create those moments, and Maria is absolutely right. It's advanced residencyship to really be taking part in this. And so, like, for instance, you know, 2008, we remember the moment, some of us who we're alive. I assume we were all alive. I hope we're all alive. Right? Yeah, okay. But you know, and we elect this gentleman named Barack Obama, and it was like, you know, the Ewoks on Endor. We destroyed the second Death Star, and Lando and Chewie are dancing, and then everybody forgot, like, oh shit, it's not just the federal government. There's also like local and state wide races as well. And the other side was like, we didn't forget about that. They created that moment and took over all those state houses, right? Which is, to Maria's point, those are the elections that impact your everyday life, right? And moments needed to be created when 3 people were expelled from attendance, or well, 2 people were expelled, where racism isn't even being insidious anymore. It's now being assiduous, more assiduous than ever. We're like, we're gonna spare the white woman, and we're gonna expel the 2 black men. The people created the moment and said, you know what, we're just gonna reinstate them unanimously, you know, like check that. So I totally agree that the moment is here, and when especially when you're doing that local level organizing, you absolutely know that the moment is there every day, because those are the lawmakers you really have to watch, you know, the most, because those are the ones that are really, really pulling things. You know, the only last thing that I'll say is that, I mean, while we're creating those moments, though, you know, I've been in spaces where this is like, we say as bass players, because I'm a bass player, right? The best way to get a guitar player to shut up is to put music in front of them, like sheet music. The best way to sometimes get like activists to shut up is to ask them a question, what does winning look like? And it's like, and that's scary. So we do have to create moments. If we can't even create what winning looks like, then Amitav Ghosh is absolutely right when he says that the climate crisis is a crisis of imagination.
I mean, something, I'm not even sure I'm responding directly to the question anymore, but something that is like on my mind as I listen to you guys too is just like remembering, as I learned when I entered the work on climate, is that this is a decades, it's a centuries-long struggle that we're in, and it's important to remember all those foundations that have been laid for us as we keep building, right? It's easy to become discouraged when you think, gosh, after 2016, everything went downhill, right? And things were just better 7 years ago, right? And not seeing the 70 years before that, the 400 years before that. And I've used that in some of my own thinking about like systems change and viewing the big systems that we have to shift. Remembering that it's not about the carbon emissions. The carbon emissions are the symptom of the culture that we're in, that extractive culture that we're in, right? And that culture is a mindset. Culture takes all of us to reproduce all the time. It's inside of our heads. It limits that imagination, right? It's when we push each other and say, okay, that's a great idea. How are you going to make it better? And how are you going to make it so that I can join in and so that our friend down the block, across the street, across the country, in the global south can join in, right? These are the conversations. I mean, I've been working on thinking about this question of how do we end electric and gas utility shutoffs so that when we talk about an electrified, clean energy grid, clean energy economy, that's an economy for everybody. I ask often now, like, for whom? Okay, so when we talk about like electrify everything, I ask for whom? Because it is very easy right now to look at the policies and investments that we have and see that it's just for some people. And that it was designed just for some people. And that when we make choices about who those people are, we're naturally taking some people out. And that is not new, right? That is not new. And so I just, I think like when we think about meeting the moment, it's also about taking time. It's about jumping in when those moments need to be created. And I think that there's different, just like in a play, right? There's different roles for everybody, and thinking about what's that infrastructure that we can build so that we're ready to create that moment when it comes, that's important too. And it's easy to become distracted and over-focused perhaps on even people like us today on the stage who are under these lights, like talking to an audience. Like it's easy to think that is where the work is, and I'll tell you, it is in the years and years of conversations, the one-on-ones, the calling the Anthonys and saying, yo, bro, this is my idea. What do you think? Tell me how bad it is so that we can make it better. And being humble enough to take that feedback and knowing that if someone's giving you the time for feedback, that they care about you. Because I don't give feedback to people I don't care about. That's, that's just like seeds on barren ground. It's not worth the time. And so recognizing how those long conversations about our struggle and how we're going to win, what it looks like, and getting answers to those questions like energy justice looks like winning when you can't be excluded from the energy system based on your income, your race, your class, your positionality, right? I know the answer. The question now is, how do we take all of our skills, how do we use what we're learning in places like the University of Michigan, in our communities when we're just sitting with our friends, right? Everyone talks about energy policy at parties, I think. And so how do we take those strands and then build something better than just the idea that I have, right? That's not good enough. We need the wisdom of everybody in the room.
Well, I wrote down that I'm going to start talking about energy justice at cocktail parties. um, but, you know, like, just thinking about, like, my own experience, like, I did not know I was in a moment until, like, reflection back, you know? Because, like, you know, and then also, like, many moments make a movement, you know, like, when you look at it, like, through retrospective lenses. April 25th marks the 9-year anniversary of the beginning of the Flint water crisis. And it's still ongoing, you know. And, you know, since 2014 or 2015, when there was an acknowledgement of that harm, we've had multiple communities, you know, like throughout Michigan, like for instance, Benton Harbor and other communities across the country that are now dealing with like lead and water issues. With Benton Harbor alongside Flint, and other majority black cities in the state, they had their local democracy stripped with the imposition of Michigan's emergency manager law. And we talk about these like as the water crises as a water, as a crisis of democracy, because if it wasn't for that undergirding of this law, then you would have had communities that had like local autonomy and agency, and they wouldn't have made those particular decisions. And I would just say, like, very recently, like we have, you know, Highland Park, who is also, you know, like on the hook for millions of dollars to fees, which could potentially, like, them going back into receivership, which would be like the third time in 20 years. How have y'all been reflecting on how our efforts are interwoven with the strength of our societal cohesion and the ability to govern our futures? I know, a whole lot.
You know, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I've been really trying to just learn about the ideas of the abolitionist movement, right, and commit myself to those, right, and understand that I'm a student there, right, and one of the things I was thinking about is I thought about how they're trying to reconceive the world, right, trying to reset our imaginations, is that a lot of times what we have to do to dismantle the kind of like prison industrial complex involves our human relationships, right? It involves how we think and feel about each other, who we pay to police each other, right? And our utility systems are a little bit different. It's a similar question of where are we using capital and infrastructure to punish people, right? When we disconnect them from basic goods like water, like energy that you need to keep your food cold, your medicine safe, to keep your lights on. But the relationships that we have to one another are no longer just about how I feel about you and how I view you, what I think about you as a person with racist culture all around me, but that's manifested in the pipes, it's manifested in the wires, it's manifested in the quality of those hard pieces of infrastructure that you can go out and touch. And that while those are similar, it means that our problems also are slightly different, right? And yet, I think like an engineer, I'm trained as an engineer twice. And I think about how you can look then at like numbers and information, not to be the ultimate arbiter of that information and how we make decisions, but you can say, look, we spent a lot of money on those water pipes over there and none over here. And that those choices are reflecting those feelings that we have, that social cohesion that we have, and that our infrastructure becomes this physical manifestation of our commitment to one another, right? And that where you see communities without, you know that the social cohesion is not that strong either, right? Because it's never a problem to keep rich folks online, to keep them with clean water. I mean, that is just not how the system has been designed and then been constructed. And so I don't think that's the only answer, right? But I do think that we can start to borrow and honor those ideas that we learned from other places, see our movements as the same struggle but manifested in different ways. I don't know, I don't have an end point there, but that's definitely been on my mind, and so now I'm curious about what you guys are gonna say.
I mean, what I do know is that we definitely, like, if we're not organizing for alternative systems, then I don't know what we're doing, you know. Today, this amazing, incredible campus that we all have the privilege of being at right now, you know, I went to the restroom and, you know, my mom was a college professor, so I was like saying to Michelle earlier, I get so giddy when I come on the university campuses because I kind of grew up on them. And we are in this different era now where we know what it could mean if you call the police. And I found this little flyer, you know, just about stopping abuse, and I thought I'd check it out. And if you are in immediate danger, call 911. And I was like, I'm gonna sit with this for a second because I don't want any person who pays much money to come to an institution like this to ever feel unsafe, right? But like, would it be the same thing if myself, Maria, or a sibling called 911, right? Like, it's 50% that we're gonna get out of harm, and maybe 70% that we put ourselves in harm's way, or just as 40%. I'm kidding. You know, so, and I'm only saying that because you brought up abolition, like, you know, teachings, and I think that one of the things that what always scares me, I call it paradoxical osmosis, when we bring those oppressive paradigms into our own spaces. Like, it's like the osmosis of them, and it's paradoxical because we have committed ourselves to toppling those systems, and how do they still end up in our spaces? I have this conversation a lot of the time with, I'm gonna embarrass them, my dear sibling in the audience right there, Juan from MEJC, like every other day. Like, Juan and I will have these like intense discussions and about how angry we are, you know, about what's going on in our spaces, and why we are replicating that. So when we're talking about things being interwoven, right, it's just really, really easy. I mean, Maria was talking earlier with a group of students about accountability. And I want to say again, you know, it's not a bad word. Accountability does not mean punishment. It means reestablishing right relationship and balance, right? So, you know, we also have to look at those ways that we allow the systems that we know we have to topple to come into our own spaces and be replicated. So things being interwoven is not always a positive thing. No, you're about to hold me accountable? Oh, I thought you were about to. No.
I'm practicing active listening right now, and I'm really intently.
So yeah, that's that's kind of that's all I have. Yeah.
Isaac, I have a lot of respect now for going third. I'm like, what was the question? Like, can someone give me a cheat? Yeah, right, like, whoa, I'm listening to you and I lost the question. But I think I glanced over governing for our futures, something interwoven. Yeah. You know, you try to pick up cues from other folks. You know, when I think about governing for the future, like, I'm just trying to be a good ancestor. Like, what is that gonna mean? For me to have done a good enough job? Like, I'm not, you know, I'm trying to get away from this savior complex that is not mine. I'm not Christian and I'm not a missionary, right? Like, I am not doing that. That's culturally relevant to me, but, you know, so I don't think as activists or organizers as superheroes. And if we're gonna govern for our future, it does mean like a lot of shared responsibility. And being honest about that, you know, because I think the conversations gets me kind of skeeved out a little bit when we're talking about a lot of collectivity, but I don't always see the collective work and collective responsibility holding. You know, I think the more we do want to engage in democracy, the more we have to pick up pieces of the work. And so if we're gonna collectively govern, it means more of us pick up the work. And actually, it's much harder. It's harder work. It is hard struggle work, right? It means being in conflict too, a constant conflict, and making sure that that conflict is generative. You know, as in my previous life, I taught mediation, and I think one thing I really learned from that is like conflict shows you where you need to grow. It's not the like, oh, now we had a conflict and it's over. Conflict is the birth of new things, right? And so if we're gonna have an interdependent, you know, interwoven future that we're co-governing, it's gonna take a lot more work. And hopefully that work will feel like lighter and you'll feel regenerative, right? Because you'll be engaging in these relationships with others. And it's only in that, like, you know, and we know as organizers, it's only that hard relationship building amongst communities that honestly holds us together. It'll hold us together through utopia and through apocalypse.
So what do you, like, I want to dive in a little bit deeper before we get into the individual questions on a couple things. One, or maybe 3 or 4, I don't know. But 5, 6, 7. Maria, in your response, you mentioned being a good ancestor. Like, what does that look like to you?
You know, for me, being a good ancestor and this burnout question are connected. I'll take an opportunity, like, to say, I'm gonna work my ass off. Yeah. You know, like, I'm gonna give it all, you know, and I know that I feel like in today's times that's controversial to say, I love working and I love fighting. Like I live for it. I'm a gladiator. You know, I am here to like take heads, take names, like so that, you know, I don't know. We talk about dismantling white supremacy. It's not gonna go quietly into the night. You know, it's thriving and well right now. And so what does it mean? For me, it means being a warrior and embracing my warrior legacy, right? Of what it means to fight for my community. And I also think for everyone it's different and we need to have more of an open conversation. Some of us are healers, some of us are warriors, you know, and like if we all play our part and trust each other, then we'll actually be really great ancestors together.
Right. Nope, that's it. Well, now it does suck to be in the middle.
Anthony and Isaac, like how are you going to be a good ancestor?
I mean, you know, first and foremost, I mean, I'm going to be able to look my 7-year-old in the eye, you know, and be like, this is what I did. I'm like Maria. I'm a workaholic, you know, especially right now. Maria just said it. I like to say white supremacy is in Book of Revelations mode. So, you know, being a good ancestor means like really stepping up and fighting for that. And I think that, you know, I'm also Jewish, and we don't really have a concept of heaven and hell. We have a concept of legacy. Right, of like what legacy did you lead, and if you really want to believe in that sort of idea of heaven and hell, that legacy you lead will determine that. So definitely keeping to work, but also documenting my errors and my, some people like to call them grows because they don't want to be like positive, but let's just say like my failures. Failing is okay, right? You listen to Michael Jordan and he's like, yeah, I was taking the ball to take the last shot probably 5,000 times, and I probably failed about 3,500 of those times, but I still got the ball to take the last shot. So like document my failures so that other folk can document that as well. I mean, again, as a Jewish person, we have the Talmud, which is like our book literally of arguments, okay, of the majority opinion and the minority opinion. And there's a reason why we document that so that we can have those discussions, because sometimes the majority opinion is wrong. See also Dobbs case and whatnot, right? And then finally, I know this is going to sound like cliche, but you know, how did I leave space that is better than what I found it in? You know, when you go camping, like leave no trace and things like that. But I think also being a good ancestor starts with being a good Earth citizen while you're alive. You know, and it might be Buddhist to say like, what are you doing right now? Maria and I like to work. We just like to work. We like to fight. We like to go into the room and make sure that like there's emblers somewhere, right? Maria and I we're not like, you know, satisfied if there aren't burn marks somewhere, you know, in the room. We didn't do our job well. And that's
more tactful than that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll give you that. That's great, you know.
Okay.
But no, last thing, you know, that I'll say about this is it's really like, you know, making space, right? So sorry, Juan, I'm gonna embarrass you again. Like when I first met like Juan, and Juan is like younger than me, I was like, ooh, you know, you know, the force is strong with that one, you know. But rather than just like, you know, I'm gonna shape Juan and I'm gonna shape like young people and whatnot, is that no, I'm gonna like sort of like, you know, let them be the water that fills like their own cup, and like, you know, make some observations and some recommendations, but not demands, you know? And I think that's it, is like, what's the space that we're creating for each other such that they can take it, and my 7-year-old being my most important client, especially.
Man, you guys gave me so much to think about here, and so I think the two things I want to say is like the issues of control, right? And working on both like how we think about ourselves and then how we think about each other. I really loved what you're saying, Maria, about like some of us, we all have different roles to play. And it's really tempting in a homogenizing culture to say, oh, well, if you're not doing things the way that I would do them, that's wrong, right? And that takes humility, right? To be able to recognize the strength in somebody else and to appreciate that while I'm sleeping and resting, Maria and Anthony are, you know, working and fighting the good fight, right? And I think that's really important, right? Like, so that balance is there, because also, I mean, when the folks who are grinding really hard need to step back, people have to be ready to fill that space as well, because those people are creating a huge space, right? And so it takes rhythm. You're talking about music, right? It takes knowing when it's your time to come in. It takes knowing what instrument you play. It takes knowing, like, that we're in this dance, right? And that it's a cooperative one, not a competitive one. And we are in a culture, though, that says that in order to be anywhere, you have to be the best, the one, the only. And I mean, honestly, I thought a lot about whether or not to come and say yes to be on this stage, because I like to do a lot of my work with other people, but not in public in this way, right? Because I think so much about how I don't care at all about whether or not people are, I guess I'll say it this way, like, I work with people that I trust immensely and that I know I've earned their trust as well, and we do great work. And I know that sometimes that work just takes a long time. I think the other thing that was on my mind is just like the experimentation that it takes to be a good ancestor, right? That we can't predict what's going to work. If we knew with perfect foresight what would work, then baby, we would have done it. It would have been done because we are efficient and good people, right? And it's important in that it's that like symbiotic issue with control of just knowing, hey, that's not my idea, but I think it could be better, and I don't know if it'll work, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that I hope that you win, and I'm gonna give you what I can to go even further, and then let it be, right? And so that's very hard in today's society, I feel like, where we're taught that like there's one right way, there's one true solution.
One theory of change.
Yes, yes, yes. We've been talking a lot about just like how do we complement each other rather than dominate one another, right? And when we think about the culture of extraction that we live in, the culture of domination that we live in, that's part of our self-worth too.
Culture of capitalism we live in. I want to have like a whole nother conversation, but I'm going to have this conversation. So, Maria, New Jersey's made huge strides in establishing policy initiatives like cumulative impacts that others, including here in Michigan, try to replicate. And now you serve on the WEJET. What role has community building and community organizing played in ensuring that some of the changes we're asking for is codified in policy?
I mean, you know, and this is so easy and so hard, right? Because like with the EJ law, it took so damn long of community building. You know, you like, almost like, is this even worth fighting for? And then breakthroughs happen, like the EJ law passes. Who the hell would have predicted that a US president would have wanted to lift up environmental justice, right? Like, we don't even like to say environmental racism anymore. And so I'm like, wow, giving us that platform to talk about how our system is structurally racist and where pollution is a result of racism, like that's, I think, been a wonderful opportunity, and it could have only happened because of communities on the ground holding the administration accountable. So I think one thing we haven't been doing well is bragging, right? Like, we're acting like, oh, Biden just talked about EJ, oh well. Like, no, that was us, right? The fact that there is a Justice 40, however flawed it may be, is because of us. And whatever it will become is also because of us. It's either because we will win or we will lose, right? And if we lose, let's always lose forward. But let's also try not to lose, right? Try not to lose. I try not to hang out with losers. No, but I tell my organizers, I don't want to hang out with losers. Let's not lose. Let's keep it healthy, and like our work can get really serious. So I do try to joke a lot because otherwise it gets too heavy. But
Absolutely.
in terms of community organizing, it's been amazing. Like last meeting, we had communities from across the country come out to talk to us about carbon sequestration, and that's important. Carbon sequestration and removal, it's gonna be a conversation coming to all of us. So we might not even, you might be in the audience like, what is that? It's reverse fracking. It's a science experiment, right? To say we're gonna pull stuff out of the air and push it back in the ground. Or like Anthony has to say, catch and release. It'll be up to communities to hold people accountable, right? To hold administrations accountable, elected officials. So that's the role we play. We have to constantly show up, make sure that good things keep happening, and we have to keep defending our wins. I mean, history's taught us, right? Like, you don't just build something and it stays there. You have to keep coming back and keep defending it and pushing it forward. The other side certainly does, and we need to get equally and more vigorous, because I think we're fighting for a better future that includes people on all sides, right?
Yep.
So many conversations I want to have. But Anthony, like you're in DC during the formation of the IRA,
Inflation Reduction Act.
the Inflation Reduction Act. I know, not the other IRA.
No.
We'll talk about that after this. Okay. Talk about the other IRA. We saw it move from a big conversation about the Green New Deal to like the Thrive agenda, and then finally like the IRA, which passed. What forces were at play politically that shaped the agenda, and how did like social justice organizers respond?
Okay, so because I was already told that I could say anything I wanted on this stage as long as it didn't praise the Ohio State football team. So, I mean, I think that as Maria said and Isaac said, we got to backcast a little bit to understand how social justice movements, our social justice movements anyway, reacted when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and signed into law by President Biden. Prior to that, as you said, Thrive and Green New Deal. And then people sort of think, oh, that's where it started. Nope. Let's go back to 1991, where we produced the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, which included ideas of self-determination, us being at the table and having access to all political processes, also standing up against things like nuclear energy, mineral extraction, experimentation, and sterilization of women, of Native and Black and brown women. And so, we produced that. Then in 1996, something that's, I guess, finally caught on with what we like to call the big greens, because there were only 6 James principles for democratic organizing rather than 17 principles. So that came out in 96. We're like, we're gonna simplify it for y'all. And we're just gonna give y'all 6, and it goes up on all the websites. And if you've ever been to a progressive conference, you'll see it pasted on the wall. And then 10 minutes later, you do everything that is antithetical to the James principles. And that brings us to the Green New Deal, right? Yeah. The Green New Deal heralded as this thing, and I want to be respectful because a lot of work went into that with an amazing Black woman named Wright, who I love with all of my heart and who is the GOAT, and I don't think intended for what happened, because then you have people like Ocasio-Cortez's former chief of staff bragging that the Green New Deal was written over a weekend in a siloed back room. And it's like, that doesn't sound like democratic socialism, but apparently that's what happened. One day it gets released and everybody's supposed to just jump on board. The only reason why I'm really thankful for the Green New Deal is because that's why Angela Adrar, former ED of Climate Justice Alliance, hired me. Because we're gonna need to respond to this. Green New Deal, it did become a hashtag. Some mainly white-led groups and certain white authors who are either from the United States or Flint, just across the border in Canada, made a lot of money off of it, made a lot of articles, but it was like, what is happening? Like, nothing is happening, nothing has changed. A formation called the Green New Deal Network was established, and for some reason, rather than sticking with the Green New Deal, we decided we're gonna do something different called Thrive, to transform, heal, and reinvest in vibrant economies. That also turned out to be something that was never voted on. It never got voted on, so yet another hashtag, another idea that was bereft of the organizing necessary to get it passed. And then, of course, we ended up with the Inflation Reduction Act, and people have to understand this was not an act that was passed through regular order. It was passed through a process known as reconciliation because there was a 50-50 split in the Senate, and there was no way that you were going to be able to avoid a filibuster. So reconciliation says that as long as it's within the budget, and budgetary stuff, you can pass it with just an up or down vote. And that brings us to where we are. The Inflation Reduction Act is heralded as this climate law. To be fair, I was actually in Colombia when this was all going down, working with PCN, which is the formation that led to the election of the first Black woman vice president of Colombia, the great Francia Marquez. Francia sees all of this going down, and she sees me like always on the phone, probably talking to Juan, like talking to Michelle, maybe talking to Maria, like, F this and F that, what the F is this, And she was like, yo, chill out. Like, there's only one question I have, which is this: why are the people who are so rhapsodic about this, why don't the demographics of the people who are so rhapsodic about this match the demographics of the people most impacted by the climate crisis? And that brings us to something that Isaac just said about who does this benefit. 2/3 of the Inflation Reduction Act is tax credits. Who does that benefit primarily, Isaac?
Corporate investors.
Right, white affluent people. Yeah. So social movements we're still trying to figure it out. I'm gonna show, because I could go on and on, but the Inflation Reduction Act is a series of carrots, lots and lots of carrots and no sticks. There is no interdiction for fossil fuel infrastructure. In fact, the fossil fuel industry is like clapping about it. And there was recently an article, why is the fossil fuel industry clapping about the Inflation Reduction Act? We won't get into the specifics, but there's a reason for that. And even with all of these carrots, to Isaac's earlier points, the question we're asking ourselves now is like, are we just trying to replace a fossil fuel empire with a renewable energy empire that still is extractive and creates a new, a whole new generation of energy and economic sacrifice zones? Because it is a delicious irony, y'all, that the critical minerals that are needed to save the world are all located on indigenous territory. So we're just gonna go extract again. So we're struggling with that. And speaking of conflict being a generative practice, last thing I'll say is just 5 questions we always have to ask ourselves when we're talking about policy shifts. Who tells the story? We didn't tell the story about the Green New Deal. We didn't tell the story about Thrive. We damn sure didn't tell the story about the IRA. Who makes the decisions? We didn't make the decisions about all 3 of those bills. Who benefits and how? 2/3 of the tax credits, IRA being in tax credits. What else will this impact? Well, you need all these minerals. Who's that gonna impact? Indigenous people. And then the final question is, how will this build or shift power? And we're trying to figure that out right now because, one thing that I can say for sure is that we are gonna get our money as frontline environmental justice organizations and organizations accountable and allied with them. And that's what we're figuring out right now. So there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. But as Maria says, like, you're not gonna run away from the argument. You're not gonna say boo-hoo. You better get in the room with me and make sure that that money is being redistributed and allocated in a way that we see fit, not necessarily the way that the Democratic Party does.
Thank you. Yeah, and also thinking about that is how is that story archived? How is that story remembered? Because that's also important, because then you have this weird perverse, if you're thinking about this 10, 15 years later, it's how is that story being retold? Not only in the moment, but how is it showing up in the books, in the academic papers? How are we, and how is that going to turn into the lessons that are learned or unlearned, when we are at the next, kind of policy conflict. Isaac, your professional background includes working as an oil and gas engineer.
Guilty.
Big reveal.
They're on our site now, and then working in finance. And now you're here talking about climate change and democracy with us. So welcome, Isaac, back into the fold. Yes, come home, welcome home.
Thank you.
What's that journey been like? And can you talk to us about how you connect your engineering training experiences with creating an economy that focuses on social justice?
Yeah, the prodigal journey, right? No. I've gotten to tell you guys this story in different ways over the last day and talking about it with students earlier, right? I grew up in Oklahoma. It's an oil and gas state. And I grew up as a very poor person in Oklahoma who was the first in my family to go to school, who didn't really understand how to navigate education systems, right? If you've never been to college or if you're not blessed to live in a family that understands how universities work, right? So shout out to my first generation folks in the audience, the first generation low income folks, right? Our fly students out there. It is a hard journey. And I knew that the biggest reason for me to be in school was to make a living. I needed to be able to work, and I needed to be able to work for my family. And we see that in our community work as well. There's people who are supporting multiple generations, right? They can't just think about me and my career and what I want to do. They're trying to take care of their elder parents, maybe their grandparents, and their kids or their cousins, right, at the same time. So it's, how did I get off on this? So, so that's how I kind of came out of oil and gas, and then my first job landed me in Bakersfield, California, where I was at a gathering with an elementary school teacher, a friend of mine, and she was like, it's kind of depressing to be a teacher here because my students will often pull brown and gray to color the sky when I do she's doing kindergarten stuff. And I started to really think about the world around me, right? I often will tell, I'm very open about the fact that my political awakening, right, my entry into thinking about myself as a political person came pretty late in life, right? It came in my 20s. It came as I came into my own identity as a queer person too, right? So I learned a lot from the queer people that took me in and said, hey, the world, the world didn't just happen this way, right? And that we have a long struggle that we're tied to. And so I just kept learning. I think that's maybe what I want to come back to here in this place, is to recognize that my education about engineering was really wonderful, and it fit the way I like to think about the world, right? In systems and kind of linear things and interlocking things. But then I had to keep reading and asking questions and talking to people who knew other things than me. And I think that's one of the incredible opportunities for folks that are here, asking those questions as they look out into the world and seeing the world in the way that it is and going, my engineering or my science training or the information I'm getting in my environmental justice coursework, how do I apply that into my classes on statistics or my GIS coursework, right? Or the hard technical tools. So for me, it's been the process of recognizing that training on technical things or the, science-y engineering things, it's just a tool. But often it's taught as a dogma as well. It's taught as a theory of change as well. And so the biggest powerful, the most powerful transformation I feel like I've been moving through and will always be going through, right? Because we're raised up in a capitalist society that has a certain way of thinking that you don't have to talk about to reproduce, right? Because it's just the air that we breathe, is to ask myself all the time, what did I learn or what am I learning? What are those tools that we have, and then how do we filter them through a different theory of change, through a different political analysis, and how do we think about aligning those tools to produce the outcomes that we can see on the horizon for climate justice, for racial justice, right, for the just transition, and recognize that I encounter this sometimes in my work, right, is it's a little maybe obscene to think about money or to think about engineering or systems or the law or complex things, right? What I admire and respect so much about our people on the front lines is that they know the story. They know what's happening to them. They know what causes it, right? And when we combine with the tools of, well, how do you show that story? How do you build a different system? How do you design for a different outcome? There's nothing that we can't do, but it takes kind of recognizing that the tools themselves aren't designed in a vacuum, that they've been influenced by the kind of like racial capitalism that we all live in, and then think about, well, so how do I take what I learned in that class with that professor who's not as radical as I'd like them to be, right? And then use it for the outcomes that I want to see. And look, I haven't met any faculty here, so that wasn't shade at faculty. That wasn't shade at faculty. That's just how we know, right? We know that the academic structure has a culture to it as well. And so I think for students, it's critical to appreciate what you can get from institutions like this, what you can learn, and then also think about where you're gonna apply those things. So I don't know, was that an answer to the question? I hope so, yeah.
Whatever answer you provide is the answer for me. Let's talk about Justice 40. Like, what is Justice 40? How does Justice 40 have the ability to bring resources to our communities? What's the real potential? And what do we still need to be pushing around it? So I'm gonna start with you, Anthony, to explain what Justice 40 is, because I'm not gonna do it.
Well, you know, like most great things, like the New York Yankees, Justice 40 started in New York. In 2019, the former governor of New York, whose name I won't say, signed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act into law. Some people refer to it as the most aggressive piece of climate policy in the country. Included in that was that 40% of all climate investments would be dedicated to what we call disadvantaged communities. And that informed President Biden's Justice 40 initiative, which is part of, like, I believe, one of the first executive orders that he signed, Executive Order 14008. And that idea was extended federally. So remember, Maria and Isaac will be talking about bottom-up organizing. That's a James principle, by the way, a commitment of bottom-up organizing, and that's where we are today. So we'll start there, and maybe Maria will take it from here.
You mean because you just told people context? Okay, so what Justice 40 is, it's in the executive order, and it's guidance, right? So it's not law. Let's not get too excited. It is guidance for agencies to consider how they're going to divvy up 40% of the benefits. So very vague. What are benefits? You know what? This is what my organizer self says. Justice 40 will become what we make it. So I'm putting the responsibility on all of us and more, to make sure that we turn it from guidance to practice, right? Like, let's not pretend that some president comes in and saves us after, centuries of imperialism. So what we have right now is guidance that at least 40%, and we always like to say that should be the floor, not the ceiling, right? We should start at 40%. Can we get 40% of resources to communities that are environmental justice communities that are mostly Black and brown and low wealth, low income communities, right? So that takes a long lift. That means that bureaucrats who have been historically discriminating against communities have to actually evaluate their systems. Like, whoa, they're like, what do you mean? Think about other people, think about how we give out money. So that's what I think is the grapple right now. And so how are we holding people accountable? Because this is at the federal level. So that means that there's opportunities for us at the state, at the municipal level. Like, has your city talked about Justice 40 and figuring out how to divvy up resources? Because I think it gives us a loose target to hit for. Yep. To say, like, we should actually think about communities and how we distribute resources. I think that that's like the conversation that Justice 40 opens up for us. But it is up to us to make it real, to make sure that if your council's not talking about it, call them and say, have you heard of Justice 40, right? Like, your local, Department of Transportation, whatever it is. We can exaggerate a little bit. This is the law of the land. It is an executive order. It is an executive order, so it should count, right? It should count for something. But again, sometimes we have this conversation all the time. There might be something good on the books, but no one follows it, because that's what the law is. We made it up, and it takes, a collective imagination to enforce it, like money. But that's a different conversation.
The only thing I would add is that,
You said no Bitcoin? No Bitcoin?
Maria and I do joke about this all the time, but I mean, another thing is that, I always like to say, unfortunately, the left, we have a habit of playing checkers while the right plays chess. So like, another thing that I have my staff attorneys doing is preparing for the potential lawsuits. Because if you think that there are gonna be a set of people who are just okay with a whole truckload of money going to Black, brown, and indigenous people, it's like, well, that's just great, you're wrong. Justice for Black farmers, when they tried to give $400 million to Black farmers, sued. So also being proactive and like, how are they going to try to stop us so we are ready and we're not reacting, we're responding, and we're prepared for that. So Maria is absolutely right, but you gotta think 3 steps ahead, because there has never been a moment in this country's history, purposely history, where it has been okay with giving tons of money to Black, brown, and indigenous, and even poor people. The New Deal, which is why we were saying, like, I don't know why they called it the Green New Deal. The New Deal was like probably the biggest handout of cash and benefits to white people, like since maybe the third, well, that was before the Third Reich, never mind. So maybe since homesteading. Right? And it specifically and systemically did not include certain people, right? Generational wealth was established then that we were excluded from. Probably that's why we were saying they should have called it Green Reconstruction instead of the Green New Deal, but that's a whole another discussion. But we also, Maria's right, we gotta go and organize our butts off as we always do for what we want, and then we gotta be ready to protect it. And so that's always where it's just like, we believe in community lawyering. The law, it sucks, it's terrible. It wasn't written for me, Maria, or you, or Isaac, but this is the only time in my life that I will publicly say that I kind of disagree with the great prophet Audre Lorde when she was like, you can't use the master's tools to burn down the master's house. That's the only reason why I work at a public interest law group, is specifically to use the master's tool to burn it the hell down proactively. So we gotta fight for it as well, absolutely. I'm sorry.
Sounds like I convinced.
Yeah. Well, no, we're gonna switch sides.
One example I'll add is to how that could look, right, is California. I was like, I didn't bring my phone on stage. I was like, I can't Google what happened at the end of this law, but California, I remember we were trying, and maybe we succeeded, it didn't pass, trying to pass the state law.
The reparations, $5 million.
Well, we tried to pass that state law that defined what that 40 would look like when it came down from the federal government, right? And so there's ways in which we have to remember that it's not just the EO, that you can start to enforce it at your state level, at your county level, at your local level, right? You could ask like city governments who you have more power with here locally, right? To say, when our city gets a block grant from the state, that will get it from the federal, institutions, will we commit to spending it in the way that we want to define that? Because it is a little bit loose at the federal level. So there's opportunities like that. And then, Anthony, you just mentioned something that I want to lift up. I mean, it's not that our administration can't do things for the people, right? It's that President Truman signed an executive order during the first few years of his presidency, right? Making sure that we put every federal government employee through a loyalty test. And they screened hundreds of thousands of people, right? I was reading the book by a wonderful member of your faculty here on campus, Elizabeth Pott Berman, who wrote this great book, Thinking Like an Economist, and she references the work of historian Landon Storr, who goes on about this in his work, right? About how that purge, right? And he uses that word purge, changed the attitudes of our government. Right. Our government is just people. Our government is just people. I could work in the government instead of being in nonprofits, right? It's just people. And our history has been to eliminate people who understand what racial justice looks like, to understand, or who are committed to the project of fulfilling the, great society that we live in or that we could have had, right? And so it's important to recognize that it's our job and it's our opportunity, I think, as students and members of an intellectual campus like this, to recommit to building that up again. That we're not just inheriting a neutral ground, but we're inheriting one that we have to rebuild and restore that kind of progressive fervor to.
Unfortunately, we're in the last minutes of our time together, and I'm just so disappointed. So disappointed. And I know, like currently, I'm part of a Reconstruction study group, which is wild, and just seeing the continuation of some of these policies that began with that really shapes our material conditions is to me totally wild. But I know I heard some next steps of possible actions, and as an organizer, I'm we have this captive audience, you guys need assignments, as you leave, you're gonna practice taking an action now. I did hear, what I thought I heard, I guess I should say it like that, frame it like that, of talking about Justice 40 at the local level, doing a landscape analysis to see what type of monies that your local municipality has, because some communities get money directly from the federal government, and some communities it comes through from the county level and gets distributed to local municipalities and the state level. So we heard all of that, and I know that we have our own type of things of definitions and practice around racial justice and climate justice and social justice, and we have all of that. And I just wanted to know what does social justice mean to you, and what actions that we need to take to anchor in the practice of justice as we leave this room and go back and live our lives after our time here tonight.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot also. No. It's been such a joy to sit with you guys and to talk and learn from you. And I'll maybe pull back something that we were talking with our students earlier about, which is it's not just about writing your congressperson. It's not just about going out and studying the Jimenez principles. It's about those things, but it's also about committing to this and just your self-transformation, right? I think the last Jimenez principle, right, is to be committed to self-transformation. That's right. That's right. And I think that it's easy to compartmentalize sometimes and think, I'm so on fire for racial and social climate justice, right? But I've never talked to my mom about it. I've never talked to my auntie about it. I can't talk to my cousin about it. Mm-hmm. And look, if we can't talk to those people in our lives who've known us our entire lives and who we hope will hold us in any kind of thinking that we're trying to ask questions about, if you can't convince someone who loves you that dearly that this thing that's very important to you should be important to them too, then baby, you're not going to convince the legislators who don't know you. You're not going to convince people further out from that circle. And so I think that's the step I want to recommend to students and faculty and members of this campus is just to, as you're thinking about absorbing all that EJ program that we have here, what does that look like in your own local community, and use that as a great stepping ground into the rest of the world.
I love that. I'll just build off of that because I don't think the mic's on the ground, it's broken. I would say that social justice is also understanding that the tactics that we use may have a threshold of effectiveness, of efficacy, and that is okay. Nelson Mandela used to say, right, I mean, to Isaac's point, we see this a lot with nonviolence. It can only be nonviolence. Nonviolence all the time, nonviolence all the time. And Nelson Mandela was like, look, nonviolence was a tactic that I used, and we decided we would use it until it was no longer effective, then we would have to change. So when we hit that flat line of our theory of change, or whatever our big green or philanthropic institution tries to impose on us, to Isaac's point, that's when we really have to agitate and say, this is not working anymore. This is not as effective in the time frame that we have left. So we got to figure out something different. We've used words up here like experimentation. You have like an amazing prophet in this state named Adrienne Marie Brown, an emergent strategy, which is just mind-blowing. But I would say embrace the idea that thresholds are okay, and to try to go against the threshold, you're going against nature, and therefore you are being unjust to yourself by trying to make yourself believe that something can work when you know it's not being effective anymore. So that's what I would say. I mean, we were joking around like earlier about kill the Buddha. You know, should we get rid of the term environmental justice because it's been so co-opted? Same with just transition. I brought up the fact that Yoda destroyed the Jedi temple when Luke was like, no, the Jedi must go, and Yoda was like, okay, you know, and that's okay. So like, you know, and just remember that fear leads to hesitation, and hesitation leads to the thing that you probably fear the most. And that's what I think that's what keeps us from really seeing those thresholds. So embrace the thresholds, and just don't be afraid to fail. Just like as I say to my son, bro, like mistakes are cool. The same mistakes all the damn time are not cool. And that's how I think we grow.
Yeah, I'm like, is this a pep talk? I'm not sure, right? Like, what my gut said was like, look alive. No, like, my gut did say like, look alive, people. Look up from your phones, please, right? And like, have some human connection. But I also think, and I say this to the organizers all the time and to my kids, like, look alive, pay attention. You know, pay attention. Because the world is getting a little scary. Like, we're seeing science fiction and it's real news. It's like confusing. It's not The Onion. This is the Washington Post, right? Like, they are talking about this. And a lot of the things that we're being sold are false. I don't even say false solutions. Why would you use that word, solutions? No, they're just false, right? Like, there is, right now, a lot of mainstreaming of things that are gonna hurt us. When you see Exxon celebrating a solution, maybe that should make you wonder, like, right? When they're like, yes, that's right. Let's not let them get away with it. You know, I think we're here for Earth Day, I think loosely, but it is social justice, and we need to stop making Earth Day something separate from democracy, because it is democracy and public participation, public struggle of those that care, that will help us. And if we don't, we are, you know, I don't want to say we're doomed, but we might be doomed, people, okay? If you don't actually look alive. We are in an existential moment, and our ancestor, whoever we become ancestors to, will remember what we did now. So, you know, no pressure, but please look alive, pay attention, work as hard as you can. But, you know, let's really lock arms, because we're running out of time here.
So I heard, like, live like your ancestors, like live like you're your ancestors right now on your earth. Be creative, be bold, experiment, don't be afraid to fail. That sounds like some lessons to me. That sounds like that can be incorporated as part of your practice. Thank you so much. I don't know how to do like the ending, but yeah, and look alive. I like to thank everybody here on the stage. Hopefully I let you sign bright. Group hug, yay! You want to do a bow? Do you want to do or curtsy? A bow.